Hi, this is Pia from UFO Denmark, and on behalf of our group, I would like to welcome James Fox this evening. And James is a filmmaker, and our group has, for the past 10 years, always recommended your movies to people who want to learn more about the UFO field. So thank you for that. You've helped us a lot. And we are so excited that you are having a new movie out this year. So that's what we hope to hear more about, and the long process and you've been doing for the past 7 years. Welcome, James.
Thank you for having me on. Yeah, it's been a long haul on this last film.
Yes, a very long one, and a
The,
lot of
the good
things have happened
the
along the
good
way.
news, a lot of things have happened. The good news is it's the first film, and I've been moderately happy with my previous productions. It's the first film where I stood back at the end after 7 long, grueling years, and I can't emphasize that enough. This really put me through the ringer. But it's the first time where I stepped back. I looked at it and I said, "We did it." I am fully satisfied with the outcome of this film. I feel like, could it be better? Yes, but is it absolutely what I was hoping it would be? Yes, it is. It's it's by far I'm the most proud of it from any previous films, times 10.
That's that's wonderful. I mean, that must be so satisfying for you. You can just
I
carry
couldn't
on until
I couldn't have said that about 6 months ago. It really came
no.
together. I'm not kidding. Yeah, it came together in the last probably 4 or 5 months. We were moderately happy. We went around the world for, 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, really, I guess, because we've traveled even even just a few months ago. I squeezed in the last interview with former Deputy Secretary of Defense for Intelligence, Christopher Mellon. That was like snuck him in at the last hour, like just people going, "I thought the film was done. What are you doing? Going to do another interview?" I was like, "This one's going to be important." Went out to Washington D.C. It took 3 months to get it, but that was the missing piece that really brought the film together at the end. Actually, the beginning as well. We sprinkled Christopher Mellon throughout, um, but I'm just very happy with the end result. But 5 months ago, it was 3 hours long. Basically, what we did was we went to South America, we went to Africa, we went to China, we spent a month in Australia, all across the United States, and we worked on the film in segments, like we did the Australian case, we did the Ruwa case, we did Socorro case in New Mexico, 1964. And then we worked on those independently, and then we were going to stitch it together with a narrative. We weren't exactly sure if we were going to do it chronologically or how we were going to go about it, or somewhat chronologically. But in any case, when we stitched it all together, it was over 3 hours long. It was over 3 hours long. So we're like, well, we're going to have to start killing our darlings. So we whittled
Oh,
it. Yeah, we whittled it down to about 2 hours and 10 minutes, and we had a screening with 120 people at a theater in Sonoma. And having fresh eyes on it and being in a theater with other people watching it for the first time was critical, because I could tell when there were flat moments. I can tell when the public were engaged, and then what bits were like kind of redundant or repetitive. And we were taking notes, and then we had 120 people send detailed emails to us, fresh, while the film was fresh in their minds. And then we looked for a consensus among the audience, and we trimmed it down to 90 minutes. That was very difficult. I remember at times in the edit room, segments I'd spent a year on, and just delete, gone. I went to South America 4 times on the Varginha case, 1996 alleged crash case in Varginha, Brazil. Gone, the whole thing. Not because it's not an incredibly compelling case, but we just didn't have room for it. And so we're going to have to do a 10-part miniseries after this. But anyway, we got it down to 90 minutes. But now it's 90 minutes of very relevant information. Every single moment of that 90 minutes is moving, compelling. And the story has a nice arc to it. all the way to the end. And your viewers are familiar with the landing case in Ruwa, Zimbabwe, 1994, where they allegedly landed on the outskirts of a school playground, or aerial school, and got out at 10:30 in the morning, broad daylight, and interacted with the children for about 10 or 15 minutes during the recess. And I was constantly reminding my fellow partners and producers, I said, guys, where are we? We're on the road to Ruwa. So the entire time our mantra in the edit room was road to Ruwa. And what I meant by that was, that's an alleged moment of contact case that people, the general public, myself included, will not believe if you don't present your case or make a strong case for it, build your case up to that point. So the whole film was about road to Ruwa, and that's where we're going, and that's where we ended. And we left contact for the last 20 minutes of the film because we felt that the general audience would never in a million years believe that a landing happened, the occupants got out and interacted telepathically with nearly 100 students in Africa in 1994. So, but I think we did our job in the sense that everyone that we've shown the film to, no matter how skeptical, have walked away thinking that that event probably just happened the way the children describe it having happened. So we did our job.
It's a fascinating case, and you've been speaking with the children who are now grown. Do you have a lot of that in the movie?
Yes. I remember Randall Nickerson's been working on a film, I think it's Aerial Phenomena or something, but he'd been working on it for a long time, even when he helped us. And I was trying to get my then investor, this guy Larry, I'll leave his last name out, but I was trying to get him to, fly these different witnesses in 20 years later. They're scattered all around the world, and it was a very expensive, and they all wanted to come with their, either their husband or their partner or a family member. And he's going, you mean to tell me that a UFO landed in a school ground in Africa and the occupants got out? Oh, come on, that's a little far stretched, And I kept saying, no, just look at the testimony of them as children. And I'm showing him the John Mack footage, And so that was a really difficult story to sell to him. But once we made that happen, we flew the children in, now adults, young adults, late 20s, early 30s, and brought them together for the first time in 20 years, sticking to the same story. They've had time to reflect on it. They could articulate better what it was that their experience, the aftermath of their experience, how difficult it's been to live with this. Some of them hadn't even told their wives or husbands, just because they were just tired of having to defend the story. But I think we did that story justice, and I'm very proud of. I'm just very proud of the phenomenon in general. I think it really is going to be a very useful tool. Not trying to come across as someone who's trying to prophesize of getting the general public to join my cult of believers at all, but to put the pieces of the puzzle together in a way that could make it understandable or digestible by mainstream and mainstream media. And I think that we were very successful in putting that together.
During your time making this film, a lot happened all of a sudden in 2017. Can you kind of tell us how maybe the narrative of your movie all of a sudden changed?
Yeah, so we were kind of getting close to wrapping the film up in December of 2017, when that front page news story on the New York Times revealed the secret Pentagon program, or commonly referred to as ATIP, Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, that had been started by a well-known senator, Senate Majority Leader, Harry Reid. And this obviously was huge news. I mean, I got people, my family's sort of scattered around the planet, and they've been sort of, let's say, reluctantly supporting what I do or trying to sound remotely enthusiastic about it. But this kind of was a stamp of legitimacy on the UFO phenomenon in general. and especially the highly recognizable characters that were behind this effort. I mean, Senator Reid was a household name in America. Somebody who got President Obama to run for president when he was a senator. And so he was very well known. And so we, at that point, it actually was a really good thing for us because it made it easier for us to generate more financial support. And we suspended, finishing the film, and set out a target list of people to interview. And Senator Harry Reid was on the number one of that target list. And with the incredibly generous help and dedication from George Knapp, we made that happen. It was very precarious. It was very, very last minute, barely pulled it off. And right down to 5 minutes before going on camera, the whole thing almost fell apart. So, and obviously once that happened, doors really started opening. And so we did a whole expose on that story on ATIP, Senator Reid, UFOs behind the curtain, what the government has been hiding to some extent. Very revealing is all I can tell you. A really, really good, really wonderful interview with Senator Reid.
This movie is going into movie theaters. It's not going to be on, let's say, the History Channel or something else. That's completely new for your movies to go into a movie theater. How is this going to happen? I mean, is it going to go nationwide, or how do you do this compared when this topic of UFOs is involved?
So I'm hoping the coronavirus thing doesn't affect. When we finished the film, I had a delivery date, I think, of November of 2019. And I fell short of that delivery date. I mean, I just couldn't work any faster. And I remember telling the distributor, because we had signed a distribution deal a year before the film was completed, and I just underestimated the amount of work, and I wasn't going to turn in something that I wasn't happy with. And, at that point, I wasn't happy with the film. We were having private screenings and some larger screenings. And long story short, I delayed the release of the film by not delivering it on time. And then I opted to do what's called a 5.1 Dolby surround mix because it was going to be released in theaters. And that too even delayed it an additional 6 weeks. And ultimately what happened was we went from a March-June release to a September release way prior to the coronavirus having even been acknowledged or mentioned. So that turned out to be a blessing in disguise, because you could imagine if we'd had arranged to have it released in June right now, that would be devastating. So I'm hoping that the smoke will have cleared by that point, and people won't be reluctant to go to theaters at that point. I mean, it's 5.5 months away. Let's hope this thing is behind us at that point. But in either case, it will be released in theaters. And if I have some other financial backers that have recently stated that if we need to go around the world with it, we have a wonderful distribution deal, by the way. We have a very competent distributor that's incredibly talented at getting these things out there, and everybody's been very excited about this film. They've had executives all watching it. It stars and Showtime and HBO and Netflix, and they're all vying for it. So it's going to get distributed. But if the theatrical release in September is affected, we might go digital. And then once the coast is clear, we'll go around the world at select theaters and screen the film.
My name is Marcelo, and I'm asking the questions. Christian has a question about: are you going to go on talk shows after the documentary is released?
Oh God, yes. Oh yeah.
Big time, I imagine.
Oh, very big time. Yes, very big. Yeah. No, there's a huge rollout. They've hired one of the best publicists in New York, Falco.
Okay.
They're doing all the publicity for the film. They've got a budget for it. Yeah, there's going to be a whole major rollout. Yes.
And Carson was asking, what was the most interesting and thrilling part of making this whole documentary? I mean, I know it was 7 years long and it was quite tough, quite an ordeal, as you mentioned earlier. But what was the most thrilling aspect of the whole thing?
When I met with Senator Harry Reid, just
Okay,
because
what happened?
you're talking to somebody that that knows what they're talking about. You're as close to the source, at least what our elected officials have access to. The efforts, it's I wouldn't say it was like fully pulling back the curtain, but it was pulling back the curtain enough to fill in the blanks of what I'd previously suspected to be true, and that is that the vast majority of evidence has been tucked away out of sight from the elected officials. Not all of it, but most of it. And I suspected this for quite some time, because you ask the question, well, if the president of the United States doesn't have access to this stuff, who does? Who has control of it? Who has oversight? And that was a very revealing moment for me with Senator Harry Reid, to talk about the pushback that he had from the intelligence agencies, to talk about the amount of evidence that still hasn't seen the light of day, stuff that he had confirmed, that there are government agencies that somehow have escaped oversight from our elected officials, and that they are extremely reluctant to make what we do know public. So, and again, he talked about the pushback, and he also talked about on camera about the pushback that he received when he was trying to launch this initiative 10 years ago. And the fact that, yes, there is evidence that he has seen that still hasn't been released, but there's a lot more that they hadn't gotten access to that they're aware of. And that was a pretty exciting moment for me, because I'd been watching Senator Reid for years. I had absolutely no idea that this secret UFO Pentagon program was even in existence. I mean, this went through the tail end of the Bush presidency, the full extent of Obama's presidency, and into Trump's first year in office before anyone heard about it.
Right. Well, along those lines, Pia has a question like, who do you think is in charge of all this information within the Pentagon, within the government, after your experiences with Senator Reid?
From what I know, and this is speculation, but it seems to be these subcontractors. So when they say that when the government makes an inquiry, let's say on Roswell, hey, where is this debris or where is this material? And they say, we really don't. The Air Force says we really don't have it. We don't know. We don't have it. I think they're probably telling the truth. I think that it's gone into an independent contract. The independent contractors, that have contracts with the government. So it really is outside of any government control or oversight, legitimately. That's who exactly that is. I couldn't tell you. I mean, it could be Lockheed, Boeing. I really don't know. I don't know. I don't know. It's not my area of expertise, but it definitely appears to be outside, most of it outside of the elected officials, that segment of government.
Okay. And there's a question from Christian. He was mentioning about how Mellon was going after the Holloman Air Force Base videos that I think Gordon Cooper was referring to. Is that it?
It was Edwards Air Force Base.
Oh, okay.
So it's really funny, actually, because and this is something I didn't realize when I went to meet with Mellon, and that is, while I was interviewing Mercury astronaut Gordon Cooper about this alleged landing in, I think it was like circa 1957 at Edwards Air Force Base.
Right.
And his team had captured on film the landing of a flying saucer on the dry lake bed in broad daylight.
Right.
And then it sort of sat there for a minute and took off again. Mercury astronaut Gordon Cooper told me that he had looked at the film, he'd held it up, and he'd looked at the frames on the film. It was all there. It was all good. He got in touch with the higher ups of the government. Eventually, a courier jet from Washington had come in and taken the footage, and then never seen or heard from ever again. So while I was doing that interview, I don't know if it was just before or right after, according to Christopher Mellon, Mercury astronaut Gordon Cooper was having meetings with the Clinton administration talking about this footage, and they put Mellon in charge of going after it. And so Mellon was in an official capacity trying to locate that landing footage from Edwards Air Force Base right around the same time I was interviewing Mercury astronaut Gordon Cooper. So we had this wonderful connection. And I brought that footage up, my interview with Mercury astronaut Gordon Cooper with Senator Harry Reid. And Senator Harry Reid said, he finished my sentence on camera. It's in the movie. I said, I told him about, my meeting with this guy, and Mercury astronaut Gordon Cooper told me that this landing happened. They filmed it, da-da-da-da-da-da. And then Harry Reid said, oh, and then it never saw the light of day, right? Or just disappeared. And I said, exactly. And then I said, then he sort of expands on that. And then Christopher Mellon even takes it a bit further and describes his efforts to go after it in an official capacity when he was in government. So it's a fascinating story, and I'm convinced, I have no question in my mind, that footage exists, and it has not seen the light of day. Granted, I think the Holloman Air Force Base footage probably exists too, but I didn't believe that when I first heard about it.
Huh.
I mean, it's right around, look, you've got that landing case, the first extremely well-documented UFO landing case, or close encounters of the third kind case, in Socorro, New Mexico in 1964.
Yeah.
Well, that was a close encounter of the third kind with two entities, with Officer Lonnie Zamora. Well, if you look at Holloman Air Force Base, it's just a stone's throw from Socorro. And right around the same time, there are reports from an independent researcher, Coral Lorenzen. I never can pronounce her name correctly. She had a couple of articles of people that she'd interviewed at the base around the early 60s, around 64, 65, that talked about a landing with beings getting out that was captured on camera. And again, I did not believe that when I first heard it, because it was brought up in that film, UFOs Past, Present, or Future, with Alan Sandler and Bob Emenegger.
Right.
They used sort of a hypothetical. And but once I started investigating the Socorro case, which I spent 5 years on, I started coming across articles about this other landing, which again is just a stone's throw away from Socorro. So if you're going to believe Socorro happened, which I absolutely do, such a well-documented case, then why not the same thing haven't happened just a stone's throw from Socorro at Holloman, White Sands, and that they had cameras on it. So I think that happened too.
Wow. I went on a binge before this exciting interview with you today. I went on a binge and watched I Know What I Saw and listened to the interview you had with Richard Dolan recently. And it was not clear. I couldn't understand Gordon Cooper's voice too well. It sounds like he didn't see the actual UFO. It was his team that was out there filming it. Is that correct?
Yes. They were I think they were putting a new landing facility for F-86 fighter jets.
Okay.
And his crew had cameras. And this thing came down and landed. They reported back to him that he had the footage developed. And again, he looked at the footage. He held it up. He told me this on camera. He looked at the footage. He saw the disc. He saw the landing. They sent it off. A courier jet came in, and that was it. Never seen or heard from him again. But he wasn't actually there watching it land. He saw the footage of the landing. And he said he talked about what it looked like, the disc, the landing, the desert, all that.
So it was his crew that was doing the filming. And did they see any beings come out of the craft, or it was just,
nope.
Okay.
Just sat there. I think they started walking towards it when it lifted off. Yeah. And it had landing gear that came out, just like Socorro case had landing gear. Those pods left quite a mark too.
Wow. And what is, I think it was Christian who was asking the question, what is your feeling, your opinion with the whole To the Stars Academy movement, TTSA?
I'd prefer not to comment on that.
Okay. No problem.
Yeah.
And also, a question for me. When I Know What I Saw last night, at the end, when you're interviewing Edgar Mitchell, he almost, he was holding back a lot when you were asking him some questions. He knew so much more. What do you think about the Wilson leak that Richard Dolan has been covering and that came out recently?
Well,
that they think came out from his files.
Yeah, well, Yeah. So I don't know how much I can reveal on this comfortably here. Let's just say that I know Edgar. I knew Edgar quite well, and I was friends with his goddaughter, who helped me get an interview with him 22 years ago, 23, 24 years ago. My God. And I've been in touch with this person, and they confirmed that probably did come from Edgar's files, and they even zeroed in on who probably walked out of his house with it. So it seems like a legitimate document, and you know, I believe that Roswell happened. We actually cover Roswell in this film, and it's funny actually because I thought about Roswell for a long time, and I've kind of avoided it because it's kind of a hot button issue, kind of a hot potato. It's got a lot of baggage. It's like Area 51.
Right.
But we cover Roswell and the phenomenon. And I remember sitting in the studio with Jacques Vallée, who wasn't particularly excited about the fact we were covering Roswell for obvious reasons. But Jacques would sit in the back of the room and he would say, "Just the facts, ma'am. Just the facts, ma'am." So what we did was we dug up archival footage with the help of Don Schmidt and David Marler and my sister Kelly Fox, who was an archivist on this project for a couple of years, and we dug up just the facts, just who was there, what they saw, what they reported, and kept it very conservative. So I'm coming from a standpoint where, and I think anyone who's got any doubts of Roswell, once they see, we had the top researchers help us put together just the facts. This archive interview with Jesse Marcel, Colonel DuBose, all the high resolution photographs, B-roll, the son of the man who, Mac Brazel's son, who found the debris. We interviewed the governor of New Mexico. I'm convinced that Roswell did happen the way it's said to have happened, and so why not having that conversation? You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
sure, I'm sure that is a legitimate document. I'm sure those conversations were had, and I do believe that I do believe that Roswell did happen.
And
The
interesting
way
that
they
Edgar,
initially announced it happening. Sorry.
right, and how incredible that Edgar Mitchell was from that area.
He grew up right around there. Can you believe that? And he
Unbelievable.
actually told me, and I can't remember if he told me this on camera. I'd have to look at the original interview. But he told me that when he came back to Roswell as an adult after he'd landed on the moon, I think he landed on the moon in 1970, I think, Apollo 14. Anyway, he knew all those ranchers, and he was famous. He walked on the moon, and he went back to where he'd grown up, and he talked to those ranchers, and they told him straight up. Yeah, so he knew what happened.
Yeah, incredible.
I know, and
Um,
I'll tell you something. I spent a lot of time in those parts when I was interviewing. I went back and I really stuck my teeth into this Coro case. That's a fascinating case. We put it together like Jacques Vallée, and I'll remind your listeners, the 1964 Socorro, New Mexico case where you had a landing and two occupants seen in broad daylight by a police officer, this guy named Lonnie Zamora. And so I was investigating that case over a 5-year period. And so I spent a lot of time in New Mexico and I hung out with locals, and I got to know the family. I got to know friends. I got to know the local sheriff. I got to know a lot of people in the area and people that were familiar with other parts of New Mexico, Plains of San Augustine, that whole region. And I'll leave it at this, but I was in touch with some people that had held some of the debris from Roswell, and that it's still out there today. They're not going public with any of it, I'll tell you that much. So yeah, Roswell absolutely happened, and there's still debris out there.
You mean debris that they have hidden in their homes?
Yes. Yeah,
Wow.
yep. Mm-hmm.
Wow. Amazing. There's a
Why not?
question.
Wouldn't you?
Yeah.
I would have kept it. I would have kept it silent. First of all, I would have kept some, and I would have kept it quiet too. Excuse me.
Right, right. You know, there was
Right?
in the trailer for your documentary, which I noticed has like almost 850,000 views. Fantastic. You know,
Oh, I
fantastic.
haven't looked lately. That's great.
Yeah, 848,000 and something. And it was quite beautiful how you had the children from that case in Zimbabwe, which the great John Mack went to investigate himself. And you interviewed them as adults as well. What that was quite moving, I thought, in a very small bit of film. What was your impression with that? How did it affect their lives? Positively, negatively, because they seemed like pretty evolved young kids coming straight to the point that they thought the beings were trying to give them a positive message.
Hmm.
Can you please say more about that?
Yeah. You know, it's so funny. It's like I'm very, very happy with the way the Ruwa segment turned out in the film. It's incredibly touching. It's the human element, the human factor of the phenomenon, and not just
Exactly.
talking about, you know, lights in the sky or craft on the ground, but the interaction with the alleged intelligence behind it. And that's fascinating. That's something that I've sort of kept at arm's length in the past with previous films, because I felt that if I was highly skeptical, I could only imagine what the rest of the mainstream audience would think of something like that. But this time we delved into it, and there were parts of the story, for whatever reason, and I'm not entirely even sure why, that I left out. And it wasn't like intentional, like, oh, I'm going to leave this part of the segment, but I'll describe two of them. One is they all recount the cases as if it happened yesterday. It's etched
Wow.
in their memories, absolutely, like like it just happened. And bringing the children back as adults 20 years later was mandatory. Bringing them together in the same room and having, you know, just rolling the cameras and letting them talk and interact and draw, fascinating. But they said to me something that left an indelible mark, and that was, if you've ever been out in the wild, and you come across a rare, you have a sighting with a rare wild animal, and there's this standoff where time stops, and there's this moment of mystery and curiosity and intrigue, and um, and they just said, like, you know, they were as curious as the children were curious. It was benign. It was almost playful at times, but the beings were just as curious with the children as the children were with the beings, if they're making any sense here. And there was just this moment of just kind of just curiosity and mystery with the two, like trying to figure each other out. And I thought that was so beautiful to hear that from the children now as adults, to describe that that interaction. And another thing that they had said to me, and again, I don't know why this will have to be in the outtakes. There are defined borders of the playground with large, like logs, and the logs define the outer perimeter of the playground. That you're not allowed to go any beyond that, because the grass is tall. There are wild snakes and spiders and whatnot, and the children were not allowed to go beyond the area that was cared for and maintained. But they would go, being children, to the farthest out point of the and dance and skip on the logs, right? Being kids, you know, just going up. So they were skipping,
Sure, of course.
and some of the children had said that the beings were dancing along with them as they were skipping on the logs. I just thought that was such a beautiful um, vision to think about, and also keeping in mind that UFO or UFOs had been seen in the area for several days, as is the case a lot of times with UFO sightings of that you know, significance, and why the craft had decided to land at the school. I often think of that. You know, they go, and children are the most benign presence and open and less jaded, I guess. And maybe that was intentional. I don't know. One can only speculate, but it is interesting, don't you think?
Absolutely. It's got a poetic feel to it.
Yeah. Beautiful case. I mean, seriously, I remember Rebecca, my partner. We have a kid together, and she's always been kind of mildly interested in what I do, and that's fine with me. We don't talk UFOs almost ever. I mean, we just have a normal life, and she has her interests, and I have mine. But she saw the footage of the children and John Mack, and then them as adults, and these were women and children, and she stopped what she was doing, and she walked over, and she went, "Oh my God, those children are absolutely not lying. That happened." And I said, "Yeah." And she's like, "No, this case, this is something. This is," and I knew that if it moved her the way it did, that it was going to be well received in the general public, and that's why we saved it for last.
And how did they seem as adults? Like, had something blossomed in them as like made them slightly different than regular people? Like more humane, or how were they different as adults? How did it affect them?
They were all. Some of them had opted to not tell even their partners. I remember this one woman. She was a school teacher, and I just kind of leave her name out of it, but she was like, "I haven't even told my husband. I haven't told my children. I haven't told my husband. I don't want to defend myself for what I'd seen. I just didn't, And then nearly 20 years later, she's flying out from Australia, and she says to her husband, "I've got something I got to tell you. This happened, and I need to go to America and meet with the other witnesses." And I said to her, "Gosh, you never told your husband." I think it's like, put it in the backs of their minds, and how do you process something like that? And then who do you trust to share it with, and who believes you? So some of them have just been keeping it as a little secret in the back of their minds, and I don't know exactly how it's affected their lives as adults, other than knowing there's a stray dog in my yard here. So other than knowing that there's a lot more going on than what meets the eye. Do you know what I mean? There's a lot more to this Earth universe than what we know.
Yes.
And
that was a question from, by the way, from one of our members named Zim. Very interesting guy. You'd really like meeting him.
cool.
There's another question from Stig, and he wants to know, what do you think about Bob Lazar? That whole thing with Bob Lazar, and the recent documentary that came out about him by Jeremy Corbell.
Yeah, Jeremy Corbell is a great guy. I like him a lot. I tend to keep. It says my video internet is unstable. Do you guys still have me?
Yep. Okay,
sorry. I tend to, and I had in the past as well, avoid sort of Roswell, reverse engineering. I met Bob Lazar in the 90s, and I actually came up to him at a conference, and I said, "Hey, thank you for coming forward." And he said, "Well, I really didn't have a choice." And I believed that he believed what he was saying. I've never doubted that. Now, whether or not he was used, exposed to some real information and some false, I really don't know. And I don't know enough to comment any further on that case. Do I believe that Roswell happened? I absolutely do. Do I believe they have successfully reverse engineered it? I don't know. Mm-hmm. Some people say yes. Some people that I trust say it's like giving a toaster to a Neanderthal. So, I honestly don't know. And,
right.
And I haven't spoken to anyone who's convinced me that we have successfully reverse engineered material, that's recovered material from these things. So I am open to listening to the evidence and hearing testimony, but I don't know enough to comment intelligently on whether we have successfully or not.
Okay. There's a
So I'm not
question.
trying to dodge the question. I just don't know.
Oh, understood. Thank you for your honesty.
Of course.
It takes a lot to say I don't know. there's a there's a
A
question
lot that I don't know.
there's a
That's
question.
one thing I've realized. Jacques said to me, I'll never forget it. He said, James, think of it this way. Think of the secrecy, the government secrecy, is more of a question of what they don't know than what they do know. And I thought, well, that makes sense, because sure, you might have recovered something. Great. Now you know they're real for sure. You have definitive proof. Maybe you have bodies, you have debris, but that doesn't mean that you know where they're coming from, what their agenda is, how they got here, like that you understand the propulsion behind it. I mean, you know, there could be a floodgate of unanswered questions. They announce what they do know. They have to reveal what they don't know. And maybe they're just too afraid to do that. I mean, can you blame them?
No.
I mean, you know, it's kind of like this coronavirus thing. Like, yeah, it's scary, but I'd like to hear from a leader that's going to tell me the facts. And even if you don't have answers to some of it, don't you think we as citizens have a right to know? And I feel the same way about UFOs. Let's find out what we know. Let's have it.
Yeah.
You know.
Agreed. There's a question from Kirsten. She wants to know: have you had your own UFO sighting?
I have.
Would you be okay talking about it or sharing it?
It's not that exciting.
Well, you have such a strong passion.
Yeah, I know. I know. People say to me all the time, like, I've spent my whole adult life dedicating to this topic. Can you believe that? Jesus, what was I doing? But so what I saw was shaped like an egg, and it was out our bedroom window. I was 20 years old with my girlfriend Lisa, and we looked out the window in bed. It was about midnight, I would guess around midnight, and we saw this like yellowy white orb thing. It's hard to say exactly how big it was, but I would say smaller than a Volkswagen Bug, like an old, smaller one. Smaller than that, maybe about half the size. And it was hovering right over a tree. And we both looked at it, and she said, "What the F is that?" And I said, "I don't know what it is, but whatever it is, I get the feeling it knows we're looking at it." She said, I feel the same way. Closed the blinds. And I leapt up out of bed in my haste. I ripped the blinds off the wall. And I was fumbling around the floor trying to put the blinds back up again, you know, and then finally closed the blinds, and we lay there clutching each other for, I don't know, a few minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, I'm not sure. And then she's like, "I wonder if it's still there." And I drew the blinds and it was gone. And that was it. But the weird thing was, I saw Lisa 20 years later, and I pulled her aside, and she's married and has a daughter. And I said, "Lisa, do you remember that, you know, that thing that we saw? Like, what do you remember?" And I was just kind of curious because I hadn't talked to her in 20 years about it. I'd barely seen her. And she described it exactly as I had remembered it. So had I not had a witness with me, I probably would have just never talked about it ever again.
Of course. There's a question from Pia. She wants to know, from your last movie to this one, has the whole phenomena changed a lot? What's your opinion on that?
Well, there's no question that it's more mainstreamed. The climate has changed since December of 2017 with the New York Times article. The climate has changed from people like Christopher Mellon coming forward. And he was instrumental in getting those tapes out of the Pentagon. The climate has changed with the acknowledgement of these unidentified objects and the taping of them from the cockpit recorders, and acknowledging that, yeah, these things are real. And so from that perspective, I don't, it's changed significantly. Um, and I think that with films like The Phenomenon that's coming out, and the participation of high-level government officials, because remember, we don't just have Senator Harry Reid, but we've got former governor of New Mexico, we got former chief of staff John Podesta, advisor to Obama, and military officials from all around the world. It's very, very compelling stuff. And Jacques Vallée was incredibly helpful putting the pieces together in a way that hasn't been done before, that really explains the story to the layman. So I don't think this film would have done anywhere near as well as we've already done with the distribution deal that we got, had, you know, TTSA and Christopher Mellon not done all the legwork leading up to it. And it's not just coming from, you know, we have people like Stanton Friedman. I dedicated the film to him at the end, who worked tirelessly for decades to get this story out. We probably wouldn't even know about Roswell had it not been for Stanton Friedman. You know, Jacques Vallée and all these amazing researchers for decades who have been at it. So this is like the culmination of all that hard work from so many different researchers and so many reporters. So I think it's an exciting time, and I think that this will. I'm really not trying to toot my own horn. It was a group effort, but I think this would gives it a stamp of legitimacy that we haven't seen before.
And in continuation to that question from Pia, she wants to clarify, what about with the objects? Has anything changed in terms of the objects as they've been observed, like what people are seeing, the sightings? Between the difference from your first films and this one?
Well, look, this is the first time that I've ever explored the intelligence behind the phenomenon. I'd never done that before with Out of the Blue, or I Know What I Saw, or 50 Years of Denial. So we're going beyond the objects, right? It's more than just objects. There's an intelligence behind these things, and that is fascinating, you know? It's one thing to describe, you know, unknown objects whizzing around our airspace with impunity, and it's another thing to start talking about beings on the ground and telepathic messages, or the reporting on shutting down our nukes at these these military installations around the world. So in that regard, in fact, I'll share something with your audience. When I met with Senator Reid, very regimented. I mean, he had a really busy schedule. He arrived with a mini entourage and security. It was a big deal. When he walked in the room, you knew someone important was there, and didn't have a lot of time. It was like, I'm going to sit down and got to be ready to roll. And then at this time, I'm out the door, and I said, hey, Senator Reid, before you run out, can I just get some B-roll with you walking down one of these corridors? And he said, sure. Thank God I did that, because I asked him while we were walking down this corridor, and the relevancy of this will present itself in a moment here. I said, what was some of the more, I didn't say I used the word alarming. I might have said phenomenal aspects of the phenomenon, or exciting or bizarre or inexplicable. And he said, the fact they're shutting our missiles down. And that set us off on another year's journey, because we contacted Robert Hastings and explained to him that we just had this meeting, and one of the aspects of the phenomenon that Senator Reid had brought up was the fact they're shutting their missiles down. And so we decided to do a whole segment on that, and that took about a year. So I don't know if I'm answering, Pia, your question correctly here, because I know you wanted to say if there's anything changed about the craft.
It's fine, but also it seems like people are not seeing these disc-shaped objects anymore. It's very much orbs or more kind of a light phenomenon compared to 20 years ago, where people were seeing more these disc-shaped objects or cigar-shaped objects?
I'm not up on current sightings. I do know that Christopher Mellon had shared stuff with me. If you look at the trailer and you look at the end of the trailer, Christopher Mellon says, this is happening now. And what he meant by that was there are cases. I mean, I know that it was a 2015 off the East Coast, where these things are going in and out of the oceans just 272 days out of the year, to the point where we just kind of left them alone. But one of the things that I was reminded of with the Nimitz case, with Fravor and with that little Tic Tac video, is it was very similar to what Lonnie Zamora had described in 1964. I mean, he described it as an egg, but somebody who could describe it as a Tic Tac. I mean, it's like, egg, Tic Tac. It's very similar, don't you think? So I am seeing some similarities, modern day similarities with stuff in the past. The last really solid flying saucer report that I heard was the one over O'Hare Airport in 2006. But I don't know. I don't know. I've been so busy making the film and the cases that we selected and covering that. I honestly haven't looked into credible reports, too many modern day, what's been seen in the last, 5 years. I couldn't tell you.
And Pia had another question. What about, do you think Reid or Mellon, did they reveal that more video, more evidence is going to come out, that they're going to release any more?
Well, Reid confirmed that it was there, that tons of it was there, that we've only seen the tip of the iceberg. He revealed that on camera. Mellon, I think look, I really can't, I don't know how comfortable I feel what I can reveal here, but let's just say this, that there is additional material there that was seen as part of ATIP. Whether or not that lead has dried up, or whether or not these people are still willing to participate, that I just don't know. But I think that, in fact, I know that when this film comes out, there are going to be a lot of people wanting answers, and we just have to rattle the cage of our representatives and see what we can get out of them. I'd love to see hearings, quite honestly, like we had in '66 and '68.
There's a question from Christian, and he wanted to know, what about the Nimitz UFO case and the pilots that came out and talked about, not one pilot that went and briefed Congress? What can you say about all that?
Well, I met with Fravor, and I met with other people that were in the radar room. Christopher Mellon, who'd done extensive research investigations on that case. I've also had discussions with Jacques Vallée about it, and Jacques has his concerns that it, again, this is speculation, that it could be something that we're developing. Again, he doesn't know, but I tend to think not. I tend to follow Mellon's lead on that one, that he doesn't even believe that anything like that is even on the drawing board. But even if it was something that we have, that in itself is a huge story, because that would imply that we have successfully reverse engineered or stumbled upon some revolutionary technology. So, but I don't know enough to comment one way or the other. I was very impressed with Fravor, is all I can tell you. I believe that Fravor saw what he saw. I believe that he chased what he saw, and I believe that what he saw exhibited a technology that's light years advanced beyond anything that we have. That's what I believe. But
yeah, he's a pretty straight arrow.
Oh, there's no question, no question in my mind about the legitimacy of his encounter. Zero.
Right. I've got a question. What about the that you mentioned the intelligence, because in the show Unidentified on the History Channel, they just avoided the whole ET aspect of it. They just
Well, they're
avoided it
probably doing it. They're
completely.
probably doing it. They're probably doing another season. We'll get into that, I'm sure.
But what do you know about the consciousness aspect of it? And you mentioned yourself and the intelligence of it, of these beings. Who are they? What's going on there? What do they want to
Well,
tell us?
there's so talk about going down the rabbit hole. There's so much. God, there's so much stuff to it. You hear so many stories that are like, how far do you go with it? And I felt like I went as far as I was willing to go without going beyond my comfort zone. And I stretched the limits of that, even talking about the intelligence, talking about telepathy, talking about face-to-face contact, close encounters of the third kind, talking about shutting down our military, some of our highest, weapons, these nuclear-tipped missiles. I mean, that's going pretty far. Clearly, there appears to be an agenda. There's an intelligence behind it, and the message that I'm getting from it is that the same message that one of the military officers had described feeling, and that is, what do we do with nuclear weapons? And, we should be better stewards of the environment. This planet's kind of all we've got. That came across pretty clear for us in the phenomenon. And it wasn't a direction that we decided to go early on. It's just the research that we did led us on that path.
So there's a question from Christian. So perhaps that was their agenda, to help humanity evolve, or what do you think is their agenda?
I really couldn't tell you. I mean, look, you can think about it this way. You look at what they do, but then at the same time, you look at what they don't do. They don't quite do something that's overtly and undeniably going to prove their existence. I mean, all they'd have to do is fly over the Macy's Day Parade or a Super Bowl game, and it's done, right? But they don't do that. That famous case with Travis Walton. I went out to that location of where they grabbed him. If they'd returned him to that same location, that was a very remote mountainous region, he wouldn't have survived. I mean, it's in the middle of nowhere. But they dropped him on the outskirts of town in a valley, like in this valley, and they shot down, dropped him off, and they minimized the likelihood of exposing themselves while being concerned about the well-being of Travis Walton. And I thought that was really fascinating to me. That spoke a lot about their agenda. They didn't necessarily want to make overt contact. They cared enough to return Travis on the outskirts of town and not drop him where they picked him up because they knew he wouldn't make it. But they wanted to minimize the likelihood of others witnessing them. So, you can only look at, you can look at what they do, but you can also look at what they don't do. And that fills in pieces of the story as well.
And a question from PS. So who do you think they are? What have you heard in all the researches that you've done? Who are they?
No idea. No idea.
Why do you think they're not presenting themselves to us? That's a question from Christian. No.
Christian, your guess is as good as mine.
And
sorry, I wish I could give you more. I just don't know. I really don't. So other people feel comfortable speculating about it, but I don't, because I don't know.
Okay. And Pia asked about Brazil. What came from that area?
Oh my gosh, that was a fascinating case. So I went to Brazil, I think like 8 or 9 years ago, something like that. And I remember a very good friend of mine, very credible guy, who's been quietly supporting me behind the scenes, pretty high up on in the entertainment industry. And before I went, he goes, "Oh, you're going to Brazil." He's like, "You're going to do a presentation there?" He goes, "You got to look into Varginha." I'm like, "Varginha? I think I've heard about that." And he goes, "Oh, yeah, there's a crash and the beings were walking around town." And I went, "Wait a minute, you UFO crashed and their live beings were walking around in broad daylight. I was like, bull beef. I was like, sure, I'll look into it for you. And I didn't look into it. I went to Brazil. I was like, that's nuts. I didn't even ask. While I was in Brazil at a conference, I met some people from the region inadvertently, by accident, just happened to be. And they just started telling me about this like crazy case. And I still didn't believe it. It was like, there's no way that something that significant take place in broad daylight and the whole world not know about it. That's my feeling of it. Boy, was I wrong. And then I started talking to Stanton about it. I think Stanton and I actually he was in Brazil with me at the time when this was going on. And Stanton started saying, yeah, James, I really, I'd been to Brazil and I researched this case and I really, I just happened to be there, I think right after it happened, something like that. So I went to Varginha and I started knocking on doors and talking to witnesses and met the 3 primary witnesses that saw the beings and really dug into it. And I went back there 3 times and I documented the whole thing on camera. I could do a whole 1-hour show on it. And it was basically people saw a UFO in distress, whether it was shot down, I have no idea. It crashed. Somebody witnessed it crashing. And it was a very slow crash, and the beings evidently survived. And the next morning, the beings were very feeble. They were brown with oily skin and big red eyes and had weird ridges on their heads, spindly and weak. Not a threat at all. In fact, they were scared and trying to hide. And the whole town was cordoned off. The military completely surrounded the entire town and recovered these beings. One of the military officers that handled one of the beings, this guy Marco Teresi, he literally grabbed one of the creatures and brought it in his car and drove it to a local hospital. He eventually developed some weird immune deficiency disease and interviewed the doctor. A friend of mine interviewed the doctor. I had that interview. I interviewed Marco Teresi, the military police's sister, and he died of systematic immune failure. So it's a fascinating case, and I didn't believe it when I first heard about it. And I went there personally and talked to the witnesses. I even heard stories of men in suits showing up at the mother's house of the daughters that saw the creature, trying to get them to tell that their daughters were lying, and trying to strong arm them and bribe them with money, which she didn't do.
Huh. Wow.
But I mean, the whole town, they either saw something, saw the military activity, or their cousin did, or their brother did, or their wife did, or their kids did. Everybody's got a story there. Fascinating.
James, we just have like 5 minutes left. I have a personal quick question. John Mack was one of my heroes. He was a hero for many people. Were there any little great stories you heard from the kids that you encountered as adults now, from their encounters, from meeting John Mack?
It was kind of a reassurance. The impression I got was very reassuring that someone of his stature was taking them seriously, because the teachers and the headmaster I don't think believed him. That's certainly what the kids told me. So I think that was very reassuring for a Harvard psychiatrist to put his stamp of legitimacy on the children. And God, I wish John Mack could see the film now. I wish he could see that. But that's
we wish we could see it too.
Yeah. We'll make that happen.
It'll happen. Yeah.
Yeah, it will happen. Yeah, we'll definitely make it happen. Yeah. So I just want to say to the audience, in closing, if you don't mind, that I had felt that I had failed on all my previous attempts to mainstream this topic. I tried with 50 Years of Denial. I sold it to Discovery Channel. I was moderately happy. Then we did Out of the Blue, and then I did another version of Out of the Blue, which I spent an additional 2.5 years on. So it's over 7 years of production on that film. Still fell short. I tried to put another movie in theaters, which eventually developed into being I Know What I Saw, and I got very close. So for this film, I really learned from my previous mistakes And if I couldn't do it right, I waited till I had the money to do it. So I was thinking of, frontline journalism or 60 minutes, high production value, professional lighting and audio and good high-end cameras and beautiful B-roll and all that stuff. And there were times when I was completely out of money, and I just said, well, I'm going to wait till I can do it right. And we did. And I'm just incredibly pleased with the outcome of this film. And I think it's going to be a wonderful educational tool for all of us. In a way of not just, hey, you must believe, we're going to ram this down your throats. Not at all like that. It's just, we unearthed archive material that's never been. Jacques' like, where did you find this stuff? I mean, we really went to great lengths to get stuff that's been forgotten, archive material that's never been seen, and stitch it together in a way that the people can understand how this came about, the modern UFO wave, and how the secrecy and why the secrecy, and how things have evolved and where we are today. And I think it's, if I never do another film on the topic, I'd feel satisfied that we did it right this time.
I'm sure it's a fantastic documentary, James. It's been a pleasure.
Sounds like I'm tooting my own horn, but I'm just saying that we had the resources, we had the people like Jacques involved, and Knapp, and all these wonderful talents helping and put this thing together. And then the participation of high-level government officials and wonderful cases. I mean, the stars lined up. Yeah, amazing. Really wonderful. Well, thank you very much, James. It's been a wonderful conversation with you and, hearing you out. And
yes, and
thanks so much.
I also want to thank you on behalf of the group, and we're very much looking forward to your film, and please stay safe. And also the people who are going to watch this, I hope everyone just gets by safely in this crisis we're in at the moment, and things get back to normal quickly for all of us. So thank you for doing this, James. Take good care of you and your family.
Thank you so much. Bye, James. Okay. Thank you so much. Bye. Bye, you guys.